Hello and welcome to episode 94 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Devin Dundee. I'm joined as always by my co-host, Sigmund Judge. Hey Sigmund, how's it going?
It's going good. We are getting into, I think, the exciting weeks now from an original film and original series perspective, but lots and lots going on for us personally this week. We are recording a day early because we're getting ready to watch Killers of the Flower Moon on the big screen this weekend. This week, you sent me a message about HDMI cables. So what's going on your end with regard to Apple TV this week, Devin?
Well, I'm doing some troubleshooting. You know, the Apple TV experience I found in general over the years I've been using it has been very smooth, but I've been having some image cutting out issues very intermittently for a while, and they've sped up a little bit recently. My first go-to troubleshooting is going to be to replace the cables. When I installed my TV, I didn't choose the highest quality cables, unfortunately. And they're in my wall, so it's going to be a little bit of a fun project to replace them. But I did ask your advice on cables to get. That's going to be my first thing to try. Otherwise, I don't know. Maybe I got a little HDMI port issue on my TV. I'm not totally sure. But anyway, I'm at the first step of troubleshooting this and trying to get my image to not cut out while I'm watching TV shows because, you know, that's pretty disruptive. We've always got to be tinkering with something. I think you've been tinkering with something maybe a little more fun than what I'm doing, though.
Yeah, I mean, I've teased about this already, and I'm just learning more and more as each day goes along. But I've been tinkering around with Apple TV automations via Home Assistant. Listeners have probably got a few weeks before we get into a deep dive. I have managed to find a way of being able to circumvent the profile select screen on pretty much every third-party app now, which has been a big gripe of ours for a long, long time. So yeah, really excited about that. But of course, there's so much happening this week in Apple TV beyond our personal experiences.
Lots coming up this week. We're going to discuss the current state and our hopes for the future of the HomePod as a major new Apple TV feature comes to the platform. We're going to recap riveting Apple original series The Changeling and discuss Apple Vision Pro's environments from a movie lover's perspective, as well as the latest from the world of Apple TV. But first, we're going to start with a highlight of Apple original documentary The Pigeon Tunnel. Academy Award winner Errol Morris pulls back the curtain on the storied life and career of David Cornwell, the former spy known to the literary world as John le Carré.
It's terribly difficult to recruit for a Secret Service. You're looking for somebody who's a bit bad, but at the same time loyal. There's a type, and I fitted perfectly.
In your memoir, you say none of it's true. It's as I imagined it.
When I was in MI6, it wasn't enough for me. So what I did was reinvent the secret world and fill my own people with it.
Why is betrayal an important concept to you?
It has a long family background. Writing is a journey of self-discovery. I see my own life as a succession of embraces and escapes.
Now, Sigmund, I know our listeners have heard me say this before, and I'll be saying it again over the coming weeks, but The Pigeon Tunnel premiered at BFI London Film Festival, where you got to see it. So tell me, what did you think?
Well, first, I gotta ask, do you see many pigeons where you are, Devin?
I've got to say, not a lot of pigeons where I live. I've run into them in, maybe more metropolitan areas, but out where I live, that's not the kind of bird that we run into.
Now, the funny thing is, as a young kid, I thought they were purely a British phenomenon until I saw Home Alone 2 for the first time, when Brenda Fricker is absolutely covered in them in New York in Central Park. The Pigeon Tunnel is, of course, not a reference to the bridge tunnel in Central Park, but instead a reaction to the title of the book by Adam Sisman that released in 2017 about John le Carré's journey from spy to novelist. And that title referred to the tunnels that run from a Monte Carlo sporting club to the sea's edge, above which pigeons hatched at the club would flutter before being shot at by guests.
Oh.
This is a documentary by one of, if not the best documentary filmmaker alive, Errol Morris, and he called Adam Sisman's book not a bad book, but pedestrian, an expected biography. The documentary of the same name, however, is anything but. And last week we talked about Martin Scorsese in terms of importance to dramatise narrative filmmaking. Well, Errol Morris should be regarded, I think, in the same echelons. His filmmaking style is a mix of sit-down interview, energetic edits, and reenactments that have become the norm, really, in the definition of popular documentary filmmaking. His subject this time is the late Jean Le Carré, a famous British spy novelist and one of the best-selling novelists of the last 60 years, with its interview portion recorded in 2019, 1 year before his passing.
Now, going into this, were you a big fan of John Le Carré's work?
Admittedly, Devin, I'm not a big reader, and instead, I am a fan, but I'm stimulated by sound and vision. Who'd have known, right? So my reference to his work is through TV and film adaptations, and they include A Perfect Spy, The Night Manager, The Little Drummer Girl, The Looking Glass War, The Tailor of Panama, The Russian House, A Most Wanted Man, one of my favourites, The Constant Gardener, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and I think my favourite, actually, of all, and probably the first that I was aware, was a Jean Le Carré story, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, starring Gary Oldman, who now heads the Apple original series Slow Horses, which in itself is heavily inspired by Jean Le Carré's work. But beyond this just being an exploration of that work, it's a memoir on his life. And it should be noted that his novels are not the one-dimensional James Bond, Ian Fleming type, but they all probe the spy world from both a psychological and political point of view that comes from his direct experience in the Secret Service, and forms a major part of this documentary, which I find really, really fascinating. In the 90 minutes, Errol Morris is able to uncover the childhood circumstances that lead to creating the type of personality that would be recruited as a spy. But there's also fascinating conversation here about who's actually in control in the world amongst the string pullers and the dupes of the world, and why people commit betrayal both personally and politically, and how artists deal with reality and whether there is such a thing as a truer self, which, you know, this documentary really does go deep. Jean Le Carré isn't, of course, the writer's real name. It is, of course, David Cornwell. And his father, Ronnie Cornwell, is also a standout subject of the conversation. He was a scammer who would spend lavishly, leading him to uproot himself and his son to repeat the cycle elsewhere, with David Cornwell's mother leaving his father and him at just 5 years old. Yet his father, who was a criminal, also made sure that David was educated amongst the most elite in British aristocracy, where he learnt how to talk like they did, act like they did, and appear as one of them, almost living a daily life of deception. And that led to becoming a British subject at the dawn of the 20th century, and really led as the inspiration for the deceptive characters he wrote about. And we've only broached part of this fascinating story.
Of course, a lot of your focus is on Errol Morris's work with the documentary itself and how it plays out. So how does this differ from some of his past work?
Well, The Pigeon Tunnel is Errol Morris's third documentary that comes to mind, focusing on older political subjects. It's almost like the Old Man trilogy, in the most respectful way I can put it. It follows the fog of war with President Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, and the unknown unknown with another former Secretary of Defense, namely Donald Rumsfeld. But this, in my opinion, is his most interesting, as his refined interrogation style results in something very different. So Errol Morris uses this Interrotron concept using 2 cameras and 2 teleprompters to capture his subjects and get that important eye contact and that kind of framing, making it far more difficult for his subject to look away and disguise true feelings whilst the cogs turn internally before opening up. Steve Bannon and Bill Clinton are actually 2 subjects that I can think of where that style of capture has been the most effective in his previous work. But what results when you use the Interrotron interrogation style on a former spy is what I think is a meta layer to the Pigeon Tunnel, where for the first time in his career, the interview is turned on Errol Morris, and that brings into question an examination of his own self and his own artistry. It turns the interview from just being about his subject to a deeper postmodern look at why he, as a filmmaker, does what he does, and puts into the question whether or not he's truly getting to the crux of a subject trained in the art of diversion and deception. To put into light how admired and important John le Carré was, I look back at a conversation I heard from Hugh Laurie a few years ago, who retold this story about being invited to John le Carré's 70th birthday party by his friend Stephen Fry, where he said that in attendance there were the heads of the British Special Intelligence and the KGB, amongst others. And in the room was a piano. And he was asked, kind of spur of the moment, if he knew how to play the piano and if he could play Happy Birthday as part of a lights out birthday cake surprise. That ended in chaos, with some of those dignitaries' first port of call being to protect the former spy and author. That's how renowned and well thought of he was.
Now, Sigmund, I don't imagine they included the song Happy Birthday in the film itself, but I did want to ask you about the music of the film and how it kind of played into the whole effect of it.
Yeah, so a special mention to the score by Philip Glass and Paul Leonard Morgan, which I believe is available now to stream in its entirety. What it does is it adds an orchestral journey combining the symbolism of 60s espionage soundtracks that we've all grown to love with the symphonic orchestral work. And they gel really well and take up, I think, 80 minutes of the 90-minute runtime. Absolute brilliance. This is, Devon, just to wrap it up, a truly special film, which I hope will lead to, firstly, new readers of Jean le Carré's novels and new viewers of Errol Morris's work, including The Thin Blue Line, which is about an injustice that eventually led to saving the life of a man wrongly convicted of murder, and a fascinating conversation, A Brief Story in Time, with Stephen Hawking. Of course, check those out in the TV app when you get a chance, but first, please check out The Pigeon Tunnel, which is now available on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens. Honestly, a huge surprise. And what a way to kick off this week's episode.
If listeners can't tell, Sigmund, you and I do love a bit of sleuthing of our own as well. And earlier this month, you discovered that HomePod and HomePod Mini owners have something to get excited about once tvOS 17.1 is made available to everyone next week. And that is because enhanced dialogue is coming to the OG HomePod and the HomePod Mini in a surprise move after Apple announced the feature as a HomePod second generation exclusive for tvOS 17. Now, this is the kind of surprise that I love to see, and it's very Apple in this way, right? Where they release this awesome feature that's great for so many people, and then they're like, you know what? I think we can give it to more people. And extending this all the way back to the 2018 HomePod is just so impressive. Now, for those who are wondering, Enhanced Dialogue is this really great feature that we've seen roll out on multiple platforms. I think Amazon's been working on something similar. Apple's got their version now on the HomePod that will bring the spoken word track more to the front of your sound mix. And I don't know about you, but I run into this all the time when I'm trying to watch a show or a movie, especially one that has a lot of like effects, explosions and things like that. You're watching Star Wars, and you want to have the volume high enough where you can understand the dialogue, but maybe you're trying to keep the volume down also to be considerate of other people who may not enjoy the lightsaber battles quite as much as you do. And so I found myself constantly, during the action scenes, turning it down, and then during the talking scenes, turning it back up, and then rewinding. Wait, what did they just say? That kind of thing. And so I am excited to have this feature that will bring the spoken words forward and kind of balance them out a little bit better with the explosions and all that kind of stuff. Especially as a new parent with a child who's sleeping constantly nearby. I don't want to interfere with his sleep, but I do want to be able to enjoy the shows and films that I'm watching. So I think I'm going to combine this enhanced dialogue with the reduced loud noises to really just even everything out and get it to where I can leave the volume as low as possible, but still understand everything. That's my plan anyway.
I mean, a tip, right? So I've been testing this on HomePod minis, on the OG HomePods and the new HomePods. All have kind of varying levels of how well enhanced dialogue works, but still very, very impressive. One little tip, though, is you can actually combine enhanced dialogue with reduced loud noises, and that is going to be a major gain for so many people, especially when it comes to loud explosions and wanting to be able to enjoy that at the same time, rather than having to like turn it on and off scene by scene. One thing I hope we see are these features coming later on to shortcuts, being able to turn those on and off, a bit like the timer as well in Control Center. Be really cool to be able to automate those things. But I want to talk a little bit about what's missing for HomePod Apple TV integration right now.
Well, I will say the HomePod has come a long way when it comes to its integration with Apple TV. I remember when I first bought my HomePod, it was just an AirPlay output from the Apple TV, and I'd have to turn it on every time I turn my Apple TV on, and that connection would break, and it just, it was good, but there was some room for improvement. And then, of course, we got home theater mode where you could set it as a permanent output and kind of have the Apple TV and the HomePod or HomePod pair being like a single unit within AirPlay, which has been great. Then, of course, we got the addition of eARC with the ability to output sound from other inputs on your TV through the HomePod. So if you've got a video game system or any other input coming into your TV, you can listen to it through the HomePods as well. And so Apple's just been continually improving the integration between the two. We've seen improvements with Siri and the ability to control playback on your Apple TV through the HomePods as well. Of course, you and I, we're always looking to the future in ways that things can continue to develop. So we wanted to highlight just a few things that we think Apple could continue to integrate between the HomePod and the Apple TV. And I think I want to start with the Siri integration between the two, because while like I said, it's come a long way, there's still more I think that could be done there. There are still instances where you ask the HomePod to do something and the HomePod will handle the processing of it, but it doesn't reflect on the Apple TV in the way that maybe you'd expect. If you ask for the weather, there's no, visual feedback, things like that. They've come closer together, but I still think that there's ways that Apple could bring them together even more to really make them work as a unit when it comes to the smarts and not just the audio output.
Yeah, I mean, my expectations when we got Hey Siri support through AirPods is that we were going to see that seamless connection duplicated for HomePod. Right now, HomePod acts as something very different, right? Siri commands aren't routed through tvOS, yet some Siri commands will bring feedback. For example, if you want to watch a certain show, you're able to do that with Siri hands-free, which was introduced a couple of years ago at WWDC. Probably one of the most exciting parts of those announcements that year alongside SharePlay. So I definitely think we need to see that kind of integration. I also think in terms of Apple Home, we get our notifications for the cameras to come up and we can see the person, but we can't speak to the person. Now, how many microphones are there on a HomePod? I think there's quite a few. So there doesn't seem to be good reason for that integration not to be there as well. we started the conversation on a very positive note, right? A feature that we didn't expect to come to the HomePod minis or the HomePod OGs, because the press release did initially say HomePod 2023 second generation. So it's really, really cool to see that. I do wonder, though, if the integrations that we're talking about will need some kind of increase on chip, and maybe we're waiting for a update to HomePod Mini so that HomePod Mini and the current second generation HomePod will be able to process all manner of requests and route them to Apple TV. Maybe that's the issue. Of course, there have been many rumours, haven't there, with regard to sound bars and integrated Apple TVs. Long-time listeners, they'll know that I'm not fond of the idea, because I think in terms of mimicking a soundbar, I think a pair of HomePods do a fantastic job. And I'm not too sure really what a soundbar would bring to the table that we don't already have, other than maybe one plug instead of two. What's your thoughts on the future of hardware and what you expect to see?
Well, thinking of other form factors the HomePod could take, the other thing we've heard a lot about is a HomePod with a screen, kind of taking on a standby style role. You know, instead of having to use your phone, you could have a persistent screen in your kitchen or on your bedside table with, of course, a nice speaker attached to it. And I love that idea. I would love to see the HomePod family grow and include a device with a screen as well. But I also have so much love for them as speakers too, and I don't want to lose that element of the line either. So I think there is always going to be a place for a HomePod without a screen as well. And of course, I'd love to see Apple continue to push audio quality and how much they can pack into those little speakers. It's amazing what they've done with those tiny little things, but Apple's always pushing forward in that space, which I love to see. Beyond audio quality, though, I also want to see the HomePod continue to be integrated more and more into the home. Of course, HomePod is considered a part of Apple Home now. That's kind of how they think of the Apple TV and the HomePod. They're the hubs of all the other things that are going on within your home. And so I would love to see the HomePod become maybe a mesh Wi-Fi router at some point.
Okay.
I think that would be very cool. You know, it's doing Thread now, helping spread that connectivity, which is great. But to be able to spread Wi-Fi as well, I think would be really neat. Of course, Apple doesn't play in the Wi-Fi game anymore necessarily. Who knows if they'll ever get back there. But if they do, I think the HomePod and the HomePod Mini would be a great way to help people expand their networks without having to have dedicated extenders and things like that. Anything they could do to continue to integrate it into the home, using UWB for home automations. I just want to see Apple really double down on their home strategy with the HomePod as the center of it, because I think there's so much that they could do there. Getting back to our TV experiences, though, I think the thing that you and I really, really want to see, and we just continue to keep an eye out for the announcement because we believe it's coming, and that is the ability to use more than two HomePods as your audio output for your TV so that you could do a full surround sound, or at least some rear channels to get maybe some kind of faux surround sound going with 4 HomePods. Of course, we hear about this all the time. There's been a patent for it for several years, and then there's been some hints in the code that maybe eventually we'll be able to make more than 2 HomePods into a permanent set as an AirPlay output. Haven't seen that come to fruition yet, but I think you and I both are eager for the day that that does come to the HomePod.
You know, I'd actually totally forgotten about that. And I hadn't put it in the show notes. I do wonder if maybe we're waiting for the next version of AirPlay before we see any of this. Obviously, HomePods, fantastic speakers. I have them. You have them. Most of our listeners, I think, use them if they don't use traditional home cinema setups and traditional speakers. I will say, controversially, though, especially with the latest Sonos speakers, I feel like the HomePods are kind of falling behind a little bit to the competition. And so the quicker that AirPlay 3 or whatever needs to come can come, whether that is just for better audio delivery or better compression or a way of maybe doing DTS like we've seen for the IMAX Enhanced presentations recently through Disney. If that's what we're waiting for, I'm happy to wait. But I am very, very excited for whatever comes next. Now, of course, I just want to go back to this rumor about a persistent screen. And I think that could be really, really cool. I also think that, and I'm not too sure how you feel about this, the possibility of a camera on the next HomePod. Now, we've got cameras on our phones, on our iPads, everything else, but you can put a cover on those. And I'm not too sure if that's the route Apple would want to go down from a privacy point of view. I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on that, or whether or not you could do something like gesture detection, like we've seen with the watch, like we're going to see with Apple Vision Pro, but through UWB, which we haven't actually seen anything further than car security, right, when it comes to ultra wideband and gesture control. So I'm interested to know if you think that's something that could come, and how about being able to use a gesture to make something happen via HomePod, maybe even full ASL, and Siri being the first assistant to be able to read sign language to make things happen.
Wow. Yeah, that would be incredible. Of course, we saw a continuity camera come to the Apple TV with tvOS 17 and FaceTime. So it would be great if eventually we could have some kind of dedicated camera with those setups and not have to actually set up our phones. Now, whether that would be on the Apple TV itself or on the HomePod, I'm not sure. A lot of people put their Apple TVs in like an entertainment case, so I guess the camera wouldn't be very useful there. So HomePod being more out in the open probably would be the better choice. Now, it would have to be a really good camera, though, because right now we're getting used to using our phone cameras for FaceTime in the living room, and I don't think you're going to want to take a hit on the quality there. We don't need another studio display scenario playing out in our living rooms. But yeah, I think having a dedicated camera that could always be available, not having to hook up continuity camera every time you want to do a FaceTime from the Apple TV, would just remove a little bit of friction and make it a little bit easier for people to take advantage of that. Now, as far as gesture control, you're kind of like making my gear spin right now, because I hadn't considered the ability to translate sign language. That would be incredible. And if anyone would do it, it would be Apple. That would be such a great way to communicate with your device, with Siri especially, and take advantage of some of those smart controls without having to type or dictate to be able to sign would be incredible. Again, I think it would depend on the quality of the camera. It might increase the cost of the HomePod a little bit, but I think it'd be a worthwhile trade-off. It might be even like something like a HomePod Pro, with the camera built in. I think that would be pretty cool. On a more broad level, as far as controlling playback and things like that with gestures, I wonder if that's something we couldn't do now. The Apple Watch and the HomePod do speak to each other through UWB for things like AirPlay handoff and stuff like that. And so if they could do some kind of handshake to where the Apple Watch knows that you're watching something, then you could just do the double tap gesture to play and pause, right? And then maybe the camera on the HomePod could be used for more dramatic gestures and things like that. But yeah, I think gesture control is a big open field for the future of interactivity with our devices. Once we get the Vision Pro in more people's faces, I almost said hands, but it's more on your face, right?
Yeah.
And once we get used to that, plus the double tap on the Apple Watch, I think we're going to get more and more comfortable with using gestures to control things. And I think the living room is a great place for that to come as well. So I'd say the future of the HomePod is bright. There is a lot of ways Apple could go with it. We've seen, I would say, a surprising amount of investment from Apple in the platform, not only hardware-wise, but also just continuing to push the software and add new features, including, as we started talking about, enhanced dialogue. So as big HomePod fans, I'd say we're excited, and we're going to wait with anticipation to see what Apple does next with the HomePod.
I mean, in terms of gesture control, I think we could have a lot of fun come spooky season, really spook people with just a subtle gesture to make things happen. I think we could have a lot of fun, and no doubt as a dad, you'll have a lot of fun in the future when that future does eventually come. Now, talking of the future and spooky season, this week we received a trailer for Curses, the animation coming October 27th.
Yeah, this one looks like a lot of fun. It's from DreamWorks. It's about a family who is placed under a curse because their ancestors stole artifacts from around the world, and so they're tasked with returning those artifacts and getting them back to the people they actually belong to. So it's fun and spooky, but it's also got a good meta message, I think, that's good for families and kids to take in. So yeah, this one looks great, and we don't have long to wait for it.
Yeah, you know, Curses, funnily enough, is exactly what we were saying as we finished recording last week's episode. Because as we finished last week's episode, we got a trailer that we've been waiting weeks for. Yes, Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, following the thunderous battle between Godzilla and the Titans that leveled San Francisco, and the shocking revelation that monsters are real. Monarch, Legacy of Monsters tracks two siblings following in their father's footsteps to uncover their family's connection to the secretive organization known as Monarch.
This is the world we live in. Monsters are an inescapable reality.
Those files belong to us, and they are more important than you could possibly imagine.
This is gonna give me nightmares. Now, you can choke down that Monarch lie about your father disappearing. Or we can find out what really happened before it's too late.
Wow. I think I'm going to lead this, Devon, and just say Kurt Russell and Godzilla. Can't wait. What did you think of the trailer?
Yeah, I agree with you. This looks great. I commented on the effects when we saw the teaser that, you know, we got just a little glimpse of the monster and it looked awesome. And now we got even more glimpses of it, and the quality just looks incredible, which of course it's an Apple original. We come to expect that. For me, story-wise, I'm definitely very into this more meta stuff where we go behind the curtain and see where the big events come from. You know, we've seen the big attack on San Francisco. We've seen the monster. Let's learn about the monster's backstory and where they come from and what they're all about, right? This is a smaller story. It's siblings trying to find the truth about their father, but I think it's one that can be just as grand emotionally and narratively for Monsterverse superfans who really want to get into the backstory behind this world. What is Monarch? What's their connection to Godzilla and these other monsters? And how many monsters are out there? Because it looks like we're going to be seeing lots of them in this series.
Yeah, I mean, judging on the first couple of episodes that I've seen, yes, that is the case. This is not just about Godzilla, but Monarch and the Monsterverse as a whole, which I think is very, very exciting. Of course, Monarch Legacy of Monsters debuts on November 17th on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens. And it also just so happens to debut the same week as Oppenheimer releases on VOD. So, you know, as I was saying about a month ago, the perfect double bill based around the first atomic bomb, of which Godzilla was a Japanese response. Oppenheimer lives, Devon. Much better than Barbenheimer. Oppenheimer.
I love it. Speaking of releases, we've got some not so fun release news this week that the After Party will not return for a third season on Apple TV Plus. The show's currently being shopped around to other streamers to continue on. We'll see how that goes. Now, Sigmund, I just want to defend myself here after last week, okay, and say I did not pick the After Party as an up next pick, so you cannot blame me for this one not getting renewed.
I am disappointed, not particularly surprised, sadly. For me, season 1 hit such high notes, and honestly, I'm still kind of stuck on the rumor/promise of Channing Tatum in the second season, and the second season overall feeling more like a continuation of the story that we left in season 1. And I think it's what we as fans truly wanted. I'm still kind of holding out hope for Private Eyes, the Hall & Oates story, which was, just a small segment in season 1, but it got everyone talking. And there was talk about possibly having Phil Lord and Chris Miller bring this as a extended feature. Which would have been really, really cool, but we've heard nothing since. Season 2, the cast of that second season must have cost a fair bit to have assembled. And I do wonder if that competing with Only Murders in the Building and, the likes of Meryl Streep and Hugh Grant, whether that took the edge off for some viewers, and maybe their attention was taken elsewhere. The idea of the show going somewhere else after having its first 2 seasons as an Apple original, how do you feel about that?
Oh, that makes me feel very odd. It's just not something I'd ever really considered. Of course, Apple's very protective of their original property, and while they don't own all the rights necessarily to all their shows, they do brand them all as Apple originals and try to keep the rights very close to their chest. So the fact that they're letting this one go and it could show up on, I don't know, maybe Peacock or something like that, it would be strange for sure. But this is the world of streaming. This is the world Apple's entered into. It's a weird world, and believe it or not, stranger things have happened. So I continue to hold out hope that we'll see more After Party in some form. And I would love to see it continue on, regardless of where it ends up. But of course, I'm always going to treasure and cherish the experience that we had with the first 2 seasons on Apple TV Plus as well.
We'll leave this subject with a really lovely quote here on Twitter from Dana Bounier, who works in comedy for Apple. She said, "I would love to go on record to say that the whole team behind this show are the best humans you could ever hope to work with. I was lucky to have the series get me through a pandemic and a strike, and I'll be forever grateful to Chris, Phil, and all for 2 amazing seasons." And I think her sentiments are echoed here exactly. From one show that hasn't been renewed to a film that we were expecting that now isn't coming to Apple. Tell me a little bit about this news from Deadline this week with regard to Skydance Animation and Spirited.
Yeah, this is an interesting one as well. Spirited will no longer release through Apple as the company ended its partnership with Skydance Animation this week on mutual terms, leaving last year's Luck as the only feature animation to be birthed from the partnership. This was one that I think Apple and Skydance were both very excited about when they made this deal, and we'll never know exactly what happened, obviously, behind the scenes, but it just doesn't seem to have panned out. Spirited was one that I was looking forward to. I'm sure we'll get to see it again somewhere else, which is an interesting scenario to find ourselves in. But I am grateful that Deadline did clarify that Apple and Skydance will continue their live action collaborations, which have put out so many great things. And I'm glad to see that they'll carry on in that way, at least.
Yeah, no Spirited, but things continue in good spirits between Apple and Skydance. And talking of good spirits, Apple Original Holiday Special, Hannah Waddingham, Home for Christmas, will debut globally November 22nd on Apple TV+. In the musical event, Hannah Waddingham will ring in the holidays as she welcomes special guests for a musical extravaganza, which was filmed at the London Coliseum last June before a live audience. Apple released a first look photo alongside the announcement, which we will link in the show notes. My question for you, Devon, is will Ted Lasso or Coach Beard make an appearance?
Well, I definitely hope so, whether it be in character or, the actors themselves. I'm sure there's going to be some great guests who appear on stage, but for now, the names of those guests remain a mystery.
as does a crime mystery series called Prime Target, which we know nothing about apart from the fact that it's in the works from Ridley Scott's production company Scott Free. The series, which is reportedly being developed as an Apple original, was mentioned in an article from Deadline this week, but as of now, no further details are known. From in development, though, to in production, we do have some very exciting news, especially for those in New York.
Yes, Season 3 of The Problem with Jon Stewart begins filming November 14th in New York, with audience tickets available now to request online. We'll leave a link in the show notes if you're lucky enough to get on one of those recordings. I'm sure they're a lot of fun. I'm excited to see that The Problem with Jon Stewart's coming back for a third season. Of course, this is more fallout from the writers' strike ending, and we're happy to see some of these productions get back underway. Now, if you didn't get tickets to see Jon Stewart, don't fret. There's still lots of fun things to do in New York City, including if you're an Apple developer and you'd like to attend an Apple Vision Pro lab, you can now do so in New York City and Sydney as of November 6th. Apple have expanded the program. Of course, a lot of people were talking about how far they'd have to travel in order to get to these labs. They want to get people working on Apple Vision Pro apps as soon as possible, so they're making it available to even more developers. If you're in those areas and interested in checking out Apple Vision Pro and trying out your app on it, be sure to apply to those labs. I've heard really good things about those experiences and that they're very helpful for development of those apps.
With just mere months before release, I've been thinking this week about Apple Vision Pro's environments and maybe what developers could do there, either by themselves or in partnership with studios. And what I'd hope to see as a film lover, I'm hoping that we'll see movies expand beyond the screen and into the environments that surround us, rather than just having environments be a persistent environment like we've seen with Disney's Tatooine Star Wars example during the developer sessions. I've been thinking about my favourite moments in film recently and throughout time. And here are just a few examples of what I'd love to see. I'd like to see maybe Kathy's Corner on Griffith Park, which is famously the dance scene in La La Land that oversees LA, the national park in the Philippines where Apocalypse Now was shot, maybe even the bridge in Perugia, Italy, where that really famous opening battle in No Time to Die takes place, or the Al Khazanah in Jordan, which is the centerpiece for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, or maybe even a few locations in New Zealand where Lord of the Rings was shot. I asked this question to see if there were any environments that other people would want, and I actually got a really funny reply saying, I'll tell you what I don't want, and that is the ship in Alien. Because to be immersed in that, how crazy and scary would that be? What I did see a lot of was the future version of LA in Blade Runner, the pier in Jaws, maybe even a recreation of the underground temple in The Goonies, or the offices in Severance. You know, maybe have a lamb that you can feed milk to as you're watching. When I brought this up, the Brian Tong, who I'm a massive fan of, questioned me on the field of view and whether the experience I'm suggesting could in fact happen given the Vision Pro's field of view compared to our own. So I looked into this, and the field of view for an individual eye is 135 degrees horizontal by 180 degrees vertical. And the people that I spoke to suggested that Apple Vision Pro's field of view would be somewhere between 100 and 120 degrees per eye. I'd imagine, whilst maybe not as impressive as the video promos, the concept would still be achievable. And I guess, Devon, am I over-egging this, or is this something that you can see happen, or are you skeptical?
No, I'm absolutely all in on this idea as well. I think that would be a great way to immerse yourself further into the world. Now, I've heard from different hands-on experiences that people have had very different takes on the field of view. Some people said, oh yeah, it's completely immersive. Some said, well, yeah, you can kind of see some black lines to the left and the right. Personally, knowing myself, I think what's going to happen when I put this thing on is I'm just going to let go of any inhibitions or questions about that kind of thing. I'm just going to get immersed in it. I think once you're in it and experiencing it, if you do kind of suspend your disbelief and don't focus too much maybe on the periphery, I think you're going to get the full experience, even if it can't fully replicate your exact field of view. I mean, we do all kinds of things that inhibit our fields of view now. You know, I put on sunglasses, and that kind of messes up my periphery, but I don't really notice it after a couple of minutes or honestly at all anymore, right? So I think it's going to be like that. When you put this on, it's not going to feel like you're not seeing your full field of view. You're just going to be in it. And I think that's going to be a great experience. I was thinking about, based on your suggestions, some environments that I'd like to be in when I'm watching my favorite shows and movies. I thought about Community. How I'd like to watch Community in the study room. You know, I think we'd all like to spend a little time in there. It's like a perfect little chaotic place that I think would be fun to experience Community. I thought about Home Alone, you know, the McAllister house, all the crazy things that happen there. I'd love to watch Home Alone, but then as I'm sitting in the McAllister house, the booby traps kind of ignite behind the screen as I'm watching. So you can see the house fall apart as the movie goes on. I think that would be great. One film I would not like to be fully immersed in, though, that I honestly have trouble watching even just on a regular TV screen, is The Core. Okay. I get claustrophobic from time to time, and the idea of digging down into the earth and being in these tiny tunnels and going deeper and deeper, even just thinking about it makes me nervous. I don't tend to be a claustrophobic person, but I just can't imagine being in that enclosed of a space. And then to be immersed in that with something pressed up against your face, no thank you. No. I think there might be some room for like thriller horror experiences maybe in Apple Vision Pro, but personally I'm not going to be signing up for any of those.
I got to say, you and I are the same on this. I watched a film years ago. Well, I say I watched it. I watched all of 10 minutes of it and had to turn it off. As Above, So Below is about people that are having to dig deeper and deeper into deeper and deeper tunnels. It's the scariest thing. And no, I don't want this coming to Apple Vision Pro or anything like it. Although I'm sure there's going to be an audience for those experiences as well. You know, I was also thinking, how cool would it be to like sit on Beavis and Butthead's couch and watch Beavis and Butthead, or be in Bart Simpson's school classroom in Springfield High? There's lots that we could do beyond even the worlds that we already inhabit. So I think it'd be really, really cool. It could also be especially cool for games. Maybe Tetris blocks dropping all around you whilst you're playing Tetris. So you almost have like a survival type game along with the traditional Tetris game. I don't know. Until that time comes, Devon, I'm not too sure if you're that keen on that final idea. We have plenty to immerse ourselves on Apple TV this week, starting with this week's Apple Arcade release.
This week's release is Crossword Jam Plus from Play Simple Games. I checked out the App Store listing segment. There's no like crosswords flying at you trying to take you out as you're playing this one, unfortunately. So it may not be what you're looking for, but it does look like a fun game. It's an interesting take on crosswords because what you're doing is you're solving anagrams from a certain set of letters that you're given to fill in the crosswords. And each puzzle has this picturesque background that you're unlocking as you go, and you collect those in a scrapbook, and then you can kind of look back on the puzzles that you've won and the beautiful places that you've been. So kind of a cool concept for a crossword, a little bit different take on it. This one's available on iPhone and iPad, but of course you can enjoy those beautiful backgrounds via AirPlay up on your Apple TV. And while you're playing Crossword Jam Plus, you can also check out the latest episode of Apple TV Plus original podcast, Magnificent Jerk, which continues its run this week.
I've been doing something a little bit different with podcasts. You know, we always talk about playing games and listening to podcasts at the same time. I've been watching games and listening to podcasts at the same time on Apple TV. And that has continued with MOS Season Pass, which is now getting into playoff season. This is the first playoff season for MOS Season Pass, so an historic moment. Now, of course, Friday also sees a number of Apple originals coming both to Apple TV Plus and theatrically. And that's where I want to start. Of course, the theatrical release of Killers of the Flower Moon, available internationally across IMAX and big screens in Apple's first wide release. I called this the most important Apple release of the week, if not the year. Of course, it's not a product designed in California, but it is a product of Americana. And it tells the story of the Osage tribe and the original inhabitants of America and the atrocities committed against them. I will repeat what I said last week. 3 hours, 26 minutes is maybe a long ask for most people when it comes to film. But I will kind of preface that by saying, how many binges have you got through on your own couch, and how long have you lasted without a break to the bathroom? Friday also sees our highlight for the week, The Pigeon Tunnel, now available, alongside a new episode of Lessons in Chemistry, which received its Critics' Choice Sophie Seal of Female Empowerment in Entertainment Award this past week, alongside the penultimate episode of British comedy Still Up, which I'm still loving every moment of. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do. What have we got coming on Wednesday?
Wednesday sees a new episode of The Morning Show and the penultimate episode of Season 2 of Invasion, which has been quite a ride this season. We'll be talking about that before too long. Hope everyone's enjoying that one. There's a fun extra this week as well that I wanted to share. There's a Lessons in Chemistry website that was published featuring recipes and a perfect lasagna TikTok challenge. And so if you visit the site in the show notes, you can see how to cook the perfect lasagna as well as some of the other recipes featured in the show. And then you can share your own take on perfect lasagna and enter the challenge yourself.
Now, of course, as with every week, another big week for Apple Originals. But it is time for us to recap a series that has enthralled us from start to finish. Apollo and Emma's love story is a fairy tale until Emma mysteriously vanishes. Bereft, Apollo finds himself on a death-defying odyssey through New York City he didn't know existed. Based on the award-winning novel, this is The Changeling.
When I got to Brazil, she told me I had 3 wishes. When it falls off my wrist, those 3 wishes will come true. Do not cut it.
Where is my wife?
We saw the finale last week. This is, of course, created by Kelly Marcel, based on the novel by Victor Lavelle, who also narrates and executive produces, starring the great Lakeith Stanfield, Clark Bacco, Aidan Porter, and Samuel T. Herring. I've been waiting for this finale to finally air, because this series has actually come at quite an interesting time for you personally, Devon, given some of the subject matter. So, as a new parent, how did you enjoy The Changeling? And I guess the same goes for Catherine, who no doubt watched the whole thing with you.
Yeah, it was quite the experience. We knew this series was going to focus on parenthood and the experience of new parents. I think the trailer gave us an idea that it was going to be a little bit horror, which it definitely was the first few episodes, and then it moved more into the fairy tale aspects of it. I think that really defined our experience of watching the series. The first few episodes, I think, are very real. They reflect some real challenges of early parenthood as far as, connecting with your child, trying to find what they need, not feeling like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, not making you feel like you're losing your mind, but just making you feel like you don't have things figured out, right? There's not a firm foundation there. It's just a totally new experience that you can't plan for. And so in that way, those first few episodes honestly, they made me appreciate the experience that I was having more, in that, of course, it's not nearly as extreme as what Apollo and Emma went through. But at the same time, it did make me feel like, okay, so this is kind of a universal thing that parents go through, right? It's just a struggle at the beginning, learning to take care of a child for the first time. As the series went on, I think it got less and less connected to reality because it is a fairy tale, right? It is based in some very real things when it comes to postpartum struggles, connecting with your child, and even that question that Emma goes through, is this my child? While that is taken to an extreme, of course, with baby Brian being, replaced by fairies and her coming to the conclusion that he's not a baby at all, there is, in early parenthood, that struggle of making sure that you're connecting with your child and really giving them what they need. And so I really connected with that aspect of it. I really connected with Apollo himself as a character, played wonderfully by Lakeith Stanfield. What a performer that guy is, and I'm so glad that he led this series and did such a great job in this role. And his whole purpose in life, right, is just to be a good dad. That's what he wants to be. And it's really based on his relationship with his own father. And this whole series really is wrapped up in this concept of parenthood and in the way that our parents affect our experience of life, and the way that that continues on into who we are and how we parent, right? So there's all these different experiences of parenthood in the series. You've got Apollo's relationship with Brian, where he's kind of the adoring, doting father, almost like this super dad in a way. We see him taking Brian to work with him, and it's all good, and doing such a good job taking him to the park and connecting with other dads. He really has such a loving and wonderful relationship with his son that he thinks is going so well, which of course is hugely disconnected from his wife's experience. Emma, as a struggling mother, at first, again, going through these very real things that I think every parent goes through. And then, of course, it takes a turn where it turns out her experience is very different from a lot of people's, where she discovers this whole other world that's going on and that her child has been actually taken from her. We see Apollo and Emma navigating this, starting off together. They fall in love, and then she goes off to Brazil and then comes back, and they get married, and they have Brian in the subway. It's like a fairy tale in that way, right? It really is beautiful in the beginning. And then we see them really start to drift apart as their experiences with baby Brian diverge, and Emma really sees what's going on, and Apollo is completely blind to it and not open to her experience in that way. And the entire series is him coming to terms with his own blindness and not seeing what was really going on with his own wife and child the entire time. But both of them, their experiences are impacted by their relationships with their own parents. Apollo's dad, Brian, was the absentee father. He disappears from his life at a young age, and Apollo kind of grows up feeling like a monster because he was alienated from his own father. He has this longing to connect with him, and the only connection he really has with his dad is through this book that he reads about taking children, and it's this fairy tale that he ends up reading to his own son, and it's a disturbing book almost when you really think about it, but it's his only real connection to his father, and he has that longing to have that relationship. Apollo and Lillian have an interesting relationship with his mom. She's the overly protective mother. She will go to any lengths to take care of and protect her child, and we learn throughout the series that she actually goes too far, right, in protecting him, even from his own father. I think that has an impact on his relationship with Brian as well, where he's trying to kind of toe the line and take care of him while not going as far necessarily as his mother did. And then Emma has a complicated relationship with her own mother, Christine, who is the mother who passes on her own trauma to her children in a very jarring way, setting fire to her own home with herself and her children in it. And that's something that Emma has to come to terms with as she's becoming a mother herself. So there's all these different layers of parenthood and of the impact of our own parents on ourselves and the way we parent. And it's messy, but I think it's very real. And it's something that I personally resonated with. I've had my own experiences in life, right, that impact the way that I'm parenting my son and the relationship with my partner as we're navigating that together. And hopefully we don't pass on those things that harmed us. We pass on the good things and we learn from those. And that's what I think Apollo and Emma are trying to do. And at the end of the day, even though they're going through this horrific and totally disconnected from reality experience throughout the entire thing, the one thing that they have in common, even though they're separated for most of the series, is that they're fighting for their son. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
And a great sentiment to end that on. I wanted to very quickly mention just some of the visuals in this show. Absolutely horrific in some cases, beautiful in others, and actually beautiful even during the horrific instances. I think it didn't take all the way up until the more fantastical elements started to really go front and center that I knew something wasn't quite right. You talked about Apollo as the super dad who takes his son to work and is pretty much always with him. Now, based on my experience of friends and my experience of friends becoming new fathers, the one person that a newborn doesn't really want to spend that much time with is the person that can't provide milk. You know, and I think that probably draws into some of the disconnects that new fathers may have, and that isn't really depicted in this show. And I think that the reason for that is because of the fantastical element that doesn't really come to the forefront of what we're actually experiencing until a few episodes in. I think the controversial element of this series is the end, especially for those that have read the book. There have been some murmurings of discontent. What did you think of the ending and the direction that this show may hopefully go?
Yeah, the ending was definitely not what I was expecting. I thought this was going to be a miniseries because, you know, it's based on a novel and there's only so much book that you can adapt, right? But really it ends in a very open-ended place. So we see these fantastical elements play out. We see Apollo meets the wise ones, these women who have had to go through this similar experience that Emma went through. And then we witness the showdown between the wise ones and this man who calls himself William, but he's actually the embodiment of this ancient evil called Kindergarten, who is somehow involved in the kidnapping of these children. And so we don't totally know exactly what that relationship is yet. But we see the showdown between the two, and we see him get defeated. Apollo goes off to find Emma, who at the very end of the episode finds the fairy hideout, right? She has discovered the place where her son is, and she goes to begin fighting for him. They don't end up in the same place. We don't actually see them reunited with Brian. And what we get in the very last few moments, I think, is almost like a preview of what season 2 will be if it exists, where Apollo comes into contact with some kind of monster in a cave. I don't really know what exactly that was other than just like a tease. The ending wasn't super conclusive. It didn't feel like the end of a show. A lot of the elements weren't tied up. There's not really an explanation of how all these different fantastical elements tied together. You know, the witch that Emma runs into who gives her the cord that she cuts. This kindergarten character who is actually introduced in the first couple moments of the series. We just didn't realize it. The story of this shipwreck and the survivors of it actually somehow ties into this character of William and who he actually is. And then, of course, the penultimate episode, Adina Porter playing Apollo's mother, where we learn that what really happened to Apollo's dad and this deal that she made with God to get away with murder. We don't know exactly how all those elements play together to put Apollo and Emma in the situation that they're in. That's what's most interesting to me. I want to really see that mythology explained. I want to see them really discover what all is happening here and tie it all together. And so I'm very hopeful for a season 2. And of course, I want to see Apollo, Emma, and Brian reunited. I have not read the book. I don't know how it ends. From those who have read the book, who I've spoken to, it doesn't seem like there's really a lot of book left to adapt. And so what it seems like, they're not just doing an adaptation, they're doing an expansion. The author, Victor LaValle, and the creator of the series, Kelly Marcel, spoke with The Hollywood Reporter this week and talked about the decision not to have a conclusive season 1 in hopes of a season 2. And they kind of just stated outright that we purposefully did not include the answers because we want a second season where we can really have those payoffs. And so while I very much enjoyed the first season and I loved the ride, I do feel like it needs a second season to really wrap things up and make it a satisfying experience. Because if this is all we have, I mean, I'll have enjoyed it. It will have been a show that I liked, but I really want to see more. I'm hopeful for a second season. We haven't heard anything about it yet, but I'm really got my fingers crossed that we're going to find out more and get to spend more time with Apollo and Emma and Brian.
Well, as we wait for, hopefully, a second season to be officially announced by Apple, you can, of course, check out Season 1 in its entirety. Maybe revisit some of the elements that you may have missed, like myself, now I've come to realise through this conversation. Of course, Season 1 of The Changeling is now available in its entirety to stream on Apple TV+.
Just one of many incredible Apple originals that have come out recently. Of course, we recommend checking them all out in the TV app. But of course, the TV app contains so much more than just Apple originals, and each week we like to give you up next picks for other things that you can stream from the TV app as well. Sigmund, what have you got for us this week?
I got a list for you this week. First off, we were talking about shows not being renewed and being renewed. I'm happy to say that some shows do get renewed, Devon.
Oh, that's low.
My guilty pleasure, F-Boy Island, was removed from HBO Max, has reappeared on the CW over in the States, and we have a season 3, which kicked off this past week. I've seen the first episode. Admittedly, I fell asleep during the second episode, but new episodes every week for F-Boy Island on the CW. Also, my pick last week was Frasier. I said I hadn't seen it, and I was a little bit scared as to whether or not it was going to live up to what I remember Frasier to be. It does it with aplomb. Really, really happy. So excited to see Frasier Crane back. And I think the new supporting cast are just absolutely fantastic. Some brilliant performances there. Now for this week, Planet Earth 3 is on BBC iPlayer, premiering on Sunday, with a focus on how wildlife has and continues to adapt as man continues to encroach and take over planet Earth. Really, really interesting concept for this season. Of course, David Attenborough involved alongside Michael Gunton, who we know for their work on Apple Originals, including Prehistoric Planet, which is still a highlight from this year and many years before. That's a big highlight, I think, for you and the whole family. Mm-hmm. For something a little more spooky, because we are in spooky season now, in the middle of October, so not too long left to talk about horrors, I want to talk about the return of Saw. Saw 10, can you believe there's been 10 Saw movies? Available this weekend on Premium Video on Demand. It sees the return of Tobin Bell as John Kramer, aka Jigsaw, with the film set chronologically between the original Saw, which was more of a crime thriller, which I loved to bits and had some comedic elements, and Saw 2, which kind of carried on from that before I think I switched off from the series after maybe the third film. This not only is chronologically set between 1 and 2, but kind of goes back to far less elaborate traps, and it begins with John Kramer looking for help in Mexico to cure his brain cancer, only to be duped by a bunch of con artists that operate and basically do nothing. He then tracks them down and sets those victims his traps. And because these are completely unlikable people, as much as you will squirm for some of the traps are hideous, there is something quite satisfying actually seeing people like this get their comeuppance. So highly, highly recommend Saw 10 coming to Premium VOD this weekend in the TV app. And finally, something I've been looking forward to for so long, Blink-182, One More Time, finally releases this week alongside that new feature length that we've been waiting for such a long time, including the return of Tom DeLonge to Blink-182. There's a long-form interview with Apple Music's Zane Lowe, which is over an hour long. It's on Blink-182's YouTube channel. Highly, highly recommend checking it out. Some really interesting answers to some really interesting questions. All right, that's my list, Devon. Maybe there's one or two things that you've got to look forward to from that. What's your up next pick this week?
My pick this week is Loki on Disney Plus, back for season 2. Of course, Tom Hiddleston stars as the villain everyone loves to love. Really enjoyed season 1 of this series. It went in a really interesting direction when it comes to time travel and getting into a little bit of like the multiverse kind of stuff, which Marvel has really been leaning into. If you're like me and you really love the MCU and kind of the broader storytelling that it's doing, Loki is definitely required watching. While it doesn't intersect directly with like the plot of other movies and series, it's underlying a lot of the changes that we're seeing within the world. I think it's interesting to see where they're going to go with it. So there are 2 episodes in so far. I've really been enjoying this one. I think the standout performance, of course, aside from Loki himself, has to be Owen Wilson. This might be one of the most serious roles I've ever seen him in. It's not like a completely straightforward thing. There is a lot of comedy in the show as well, but it's more understated. And honestly, I don't even see Owen Wilson when I see him on screen anymore. I just see Mobius now, and he just so embodies that character, and it's really great. So I highly recommend checking it out, Loki Season 2. And Sigmund, I believe that's all we have for this week. Jam-packed show, lots of great stuff. Thanks so much to everyone for listening. We appreciate it so much. Of course, we welcome your feedback. If you'd like, follow us on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating and review there. We'd love to hear from you. Or you can reach out to us on social media via the links in the show notes. Or if you'd like to, you can always email the show or send us an iMessage to mrolfm@screentimes.net. We would love to hear from you there as well.
We'll be back next week to talk Invasion and some spooky Apple originals. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and as we close, we'd like to take a moment to recognize the recent terror attacks in Israel with some words from Dickinson creator Elena Smith. I am a Jew. I carry the seeds of my own destruction in my DNA. I am scarred by histories that came and went before my eyes first opened to the broken world. I celebrate sad holidays. I am one thread woven into an ancient shoal that can never be fully unravelled, nor fully repaired. When I die, this will be the shroud in which I am blessed to be hidden, and rather than being remembered, I will become part of this great act of memory which made my life possible.
Our thoughts are with the victims and all those suffering, and we continue to pray for peace.